to the viewport of Nexus Station, watching the stars blur past as ships arrive for the 87th Galactic Tournament. His reflection showed a man in his 40s, tall and lean, with close-cropped gray hair that had once been black. The standard issue, Earth Alliance uniform hung a bit loose on his frame these days. 20 years of military service had left their mark, not just the prosthetic leg he now wore, but in the quiet way he held himself apart from the other human competitors who laughed and celebrated in the station's main hall. Park preferred the emptier observation deck away from the noise. "First time seeing the Nexus?" asked a fellow human athlete passing by. Park shook his head. "Third tournament. Just getting my bearings before the crowds arrive." What he didn't say was how the packed corridors sometimes triggered memories of the Sol Proxima conflict, the cramped transport ships, the thundering evacuation alarms. Better to start each day with some quiet. As registration time approached, Park made his way toward the central hub. The station had transformed overnight into a bustling marketplace of species. Tall, willowy Altarians glided past in robes that seemed to defy gravity, barrel-chested Dornax warriors comparing battle scars, even a pair of crystalline Vex, who rarely left their home system. Most humans stuck together in tight groups. Safety in numbers was an old instinct that persisted even in these peaceful times. Park moved alone, nodding politely to aliens who met his eyes. It was in one of the less crowded side passages that he first noticed the small Valaxian. The child, at least Park assumed it was a child from the size, struggled along the corridor, using what looked like homemade walking aids. The Valaxians were insectoid, with iridescent exoskeletons that normally gleamed like polished metal under the station lights. This one's shell seemed dull, slightly malformed around the lower limbs. Most humans kept their distance from Valaxians. Their appearance triggered something primal in the human brain. Too many legs, too many eyes, movements just different enough to set off alarm bells. The Sol Proxima War hadn't helped matters. Even though the Valaxians had remained neutral, the young Valaxian was trying to see a display screen showing tournament brackets, but the crowd blocked his view. His walking aids, crude metal extensions attached to his middle limbs, couldn't raise him high enough. Park found himself walking over before he'd consciously decided to help. "Need a boost?" he asked, knowing the universal translators would convert his words. The Valaxian child startled, his antennae quivering in what Park recognized as surprise. All four of his main eyes swiveled upward to take in the human's face. Park tapped his ear where his translator sat. "Can you understand me?" A clicking sound emerged, transformed by Park's device into, "Yes, I understand. Humans normally avoid us." "I'm not most humans," Park said with a small smile. "Which bracket are you trying to see?" "Junior agility trials," came the translated reply, the clicking sound somehow conveying excitement despite the mechanical translation. "I want to know when they start." Park glanced at the malformed limbs and the makeshift mobility aids, then back at the screen advertising a competition that involved running, jumping, and climbing. Something tightened in his chest. "Let me check for you," he offered, stepping forward to navigate the tournament schedule. "Junior agility trials begin tomorrow at midday Central Arena," Park reported, turning back to find the Valaxian child watching him intently. "Thank you, human. My name is Tay," the child said, his translator making the clicks and chirps into soft words. "Commander Park," he replied, instinctively offering a small bow rather than a handshake, knowing Valaxians didn't share the custom. "You have a metal leg," Tay observed suddenly. Park realized the child had spotted the gleam of his prosthetic where his pant leg had risen slightly. "Yes, lost the original during a battle." Tay's antennae quivered again. "I was born wrong," he said simply, gesturing to his malformed lower body. "My people think it means I am less." The directness caught Park off guard. There was no self-pity in the statement, just honest assessment. Before he could respond, a sharp series of clicks echoed from behind them. Another Valaxian, clearly adult from his size and the elaborate markings on his exoskeleton, approached rapidly. "Nephew, you must not bother the humans," the translator converted. though the clicking sounded harsh even before translation. He helped me, Tay replied, antennae flattening slightly. The adult Valaxian, Tay's uncle, apparently stopped, all eyes focusing on Park with what seemed like suspicion. I'm Park, he said simply. Your nephew wanted to check the junior agility schedule. The adult's antennae twitched in what Park couldn't interpret. I am Sung. We appreciate the assistance but must go now. As Sung ushered Tay away, the boy turned his head, all four eyes still fixed on Park. Something in that gaze, curiosity, perhaps hope, stayed with the commander as he continued toward registration. Park didn't know then that this chance meeting would change not just the tournament, but the relationship between their species. He only knew that for the first time since arriving at the station, he felt something other than the weight of his memories. He felt interested in what tomorrow might bring. The preliminary rounds of the marksmanship competition took place in a massive arena with targets that shifted and moved at varying speeds. Park stood in his lane, breathing steadily as he had been trained to do decades ago. The tournament-issued pulse rifle felt different from his military gear, lighter and calibrated for precision rather than power, but the fundamentals remained the same. Focus on your breathing, his old sergeant used to say. The target is just an extension of your intention. When the signal came, Park raised his weapon and fired 5 shots in quick succession. The holographic targets shimmered and registered direct hits. Around him, competitors from 24 worlds did the same, some using appendages that barely resembled arms, others employing strange technologies that seemed to bend physics. Impressive form, Commander, said Lee, the Earth Team captain, approaching after Park's round finished. You've put us in excellent position for the quarterfinals. Park nodded, disassembling the rifle with practiced movements. Just doing my part. The diplomatic corps would appreciate if you'd join the reception tonight. Lee added. The Arcturian ambassador specifically asked to meet our top shooter. I'll try to make an appearance, Park replied, though both knew it was unlikely. Park's discomfort with formal gatherings was well documented. Instead of heading back to the human quarters, Park found himself wandering through the station's central hub. Unlike the segregated living areas where most species kept to themselves, the hub was a true interstellar crossroads. Merchants, spectators, and competitors from across the galaxy mingling in what passed for harmony. That's where he spotted Tay again. The young Valaxian was watching a demonstration of Balaxi sword dancing, his makeshift mobility aids propped against a bench. A small crowd had gathered to watch the performance, but Park noticed something else. The wide berth other spectators gave the Valaxian, creating an empty circle around him despite the packed venue. Park approached, standing beside the bench. Good performance? Tay's antennae shot up in surprise before settling into what Park was learning indicated pleasure. Commander Park, yes, the Balaxi move like water. I've only seen recordings before. First time at the tournaments? Park asked, sitting on the far end of the bench. First time off-world, Tay clicked, his translator giving the words an excited pitch. Uncle Sung works as a maintenance technician on supply ships. He finally got permission to bring me. A commotion arose nearby. A group of juvenile Draexans, a reptilian species known for their territorial aggression, had noticed the human and Valaxian talking. Careful, human, one called out, translator making his hissing speech understandable. The bugs carry parasites. Might crawl inside while you sleep. Park kept his expression neutral, though his posture straightened slightly, a soldier's instinctive response to threat. They're right to warn you, Tay said quietly. Most species avoid us. Our appearance is disturbing to many. People fear what they don't understand, Park replied. Happens on Earth, too. Tay's head tilted, a curiously human gesture that must have been learned from observation. Is that why you have no fear? Because you understand us? Park almost laughed. No, I understand very little about Valaxians. I just know what it's like to be seen as different. He gestured subtly toward his prosthetic leg. Tay's multiple eyes followed the movement, their compound surfaces reflecting the station's lights. You were damaged in battle. That brings honor, Tay clicked. I was born flawed. In Valaxian culture, physical imperfection suggests spiritual weakness. His antennae drooped slightly. Most believe my form reveals inner corruption. The matter-of-fact way he stated this hit Park harder than any complaint would have. Before he could respond, the drakes and youths approached, emboldened by the tournament atmosphere. "Hey, broken bug," the largest one called out, translator giving his words a sneer quality. "Why even come to watch? Not like you could ever compete with that body." Park remained seated but shifted slightly, positioning himself between Tay and the approaching group. "Move along," he said quietly. The Drakesans hesitated, reptilian eyes narrowing at the humans' interference. Their species had a treaty with Earth but little actual contact. Commander Park stood up. "You protecting this thing?" the leader asked incredulously. "Doesn't even belong here. Their kind don't compete. They build ships and fix machines. That's all they're good for." Park stood slowly, his greater height becoming apparent. Nothing in his stance was openly threatening, but 20 years of military service had taught him how to project authority without violence. I said, "Move along." A tense moment passed before the Drakesans backed away, muttering what must have been insults in their native tongue that the translators deemed best not to convert. The incident drew stares. Humans rarely engaged with Valaxians, much less defended them. The Proxima conflict had left too many wounds despite the Valaxians' neutrality during the war. Old prejudices died hard. "You shouldn't have done that." Tay clicked as Park sat down again. "Now people will talk about you." "Let them," Park shrugged. "I've been talked about before." A rapid series of clicks approached from behind. Tay's uncle, Sung, had appeared, his antennae rigid with what seemed like alarm. "Nephew, I've been searching for you." Sung's translator conveyed his agitation. He glanced at Park with all four eyes, antenna twitching nervously. "Commander, I appreciate your intervention, but it's unwise to draw attention." "Uncle," Commander Park stood up for me. Tay clicked excitedly. The Drakesans left. Sung's exoskeleton seemed to shimmer with anxiety. "Not everyone appreciates interference in cultural matters." "Bullying isn't cultural," Park said flatly. Sung hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Commander, you don't understand what it means for Tay to be as he is. His parents abandoned him to my care because his form brought shame to their lineage. I accepted responsibility, but we live carefully. We cannot afford attention." Park watched the older Valaxian's nervous movements and recognized something familiar. Not just fear, but the protective instinct of someone responsible for a vulnerable charge in the hostile territory. It was the same look he'd seen in his squad, leader's eyes when they'd been surrounded and outgunned. "I understand living carefully," Park said more gently. "But sometimes standing your ground matters too." Later, as he walked Tay and Sung to their quarters in the lower decks, far from the comfortable human section, Park noticed the stares they received, curious, dismissive, occasionally hostile. He also noticed something else. Tay walked straighter. When passing other Valaxians, his makeshift supports clicking against the floor in a rhythm that seemed almost defiant. "Will you watch the junior agility trials tomorrow?" Tay asked as they reached the Valaxian sector. "Just watching?" Park raised an eyebrow. "I thought you might enter." Sung's antennae flattened immediately, but Tay's vibrated with excitement. I couldn't." Tay clicked, though his body language suggested otherwise. "No one with my condition has ever competed." "Then maybe it's time someone did," Park replied, surprising himself with the suggestion. He hadn't come to this tournament to get involved in alien affairs. He'd come to compete, to represent Earth, and then return to his quiet life. Yet something about the young Valaxian situation resonated with him in ways he hadn't expected. Perhaps it was the echo of his own struggles after losing his leg, or maybe just the simple recognition of spirit constrained by circumstance and the expectations of others. Either way, as he headed back to the human quarters, Park found himself thinking about the junior agility course and wondering just what modifications Tay's mobility aids might need to navigate it. The mid-tournament rest day found the station's recreation decks packed with competitors and spectators, seeking entertainment between events. Park had advanced to the semi-finals in marksmanship with methodical precision that impressed even the Altarian judges known for their impossibly high standards. Instead of celebrating with the Earth team, he found himself in a quiet corner of the observation deck, a deck of playing cards spread before him. "This one is called poker," Park explained, dealing 5 cards each to himself and Tay. "It's about strategy, but also about hiding what you know." Tay's appendages carefully arranged the cards, his translator working overtime to convert his excited clicks into words. "We have similar games on our homeworld, but with pattern stones instead of cards." Over the past 2 days, their meetings had become routine. Park would finish his competition rounds and Tay would be waiting in one of the public areas, having slipped away from his uncle's watchful gaze. The young Valaxian's curiosity about humans was insatiable. "Your species confuses many of us," Tay admitted, antennae twitching as he studied his cards. "You fight among yourselves constantly but unite fiercely against outside threats. You claim to value peace but excel at warfare. You are physically fragile yet have survived challenges that destroyed stronger species." Park smiled slightly. "We confuse ourselves sometimes too." A comfortable silence fell between them as they played, broken only by the occasional explanation of rules. Park found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did around others. Perhaps it was easier with someone who couldn't read human facial expressions, who didn't expect him to be sociable in the typical human way. "I've been meaning to ask," Park said eventually, nodding toward Tay's mobility aids leaning against the table. "Who made those for you?" "I built them myself," Tay clicked, antennae rising with unmistakable pride. "Uncle Sung helped with the metal joining, but the design is mine. Our medical technologies could fix my condition, but—" His antennae drooped. "Such treatments are reserved for those deemed worthy contributors to the collective." "And they decided you weren't worthy?" Park asked, keeping his tone neutral despite the anger building inside him. "I failed the aptitude tests," Tay explained matter-of-factly. "My cognitive processing meets standards, but physical limitation disqualifies me from many roles. Without proper function classification, medical resources are allocated elsewhere." Park laid down his cards, suddenly uninterested in the game. After a moment's hesitation, he rolled up his pant leg, revealing the seamless integration of advanced prosthetic technology with his natural limb. "Lost it when I was 25, he said, quietly. "Transport ship I was commanding took heavy fire during an evacuation mission. I had to hold a bulkhead in place while my team got civilians to the escape pods. By the time they came back for me, the damage was too severe to save the leg." Tay's 4 eyes focused intently on the prosthetic, his antennae perfectly still in what Park had come to recognize as deep concentration. "Does it function like your original limb?" the young Valaxian asked. "Better in some ways, stronger certainly, but it doesn't feel the same. Pressure, temperature, the sensations are there but different." Park tapped the knee joint. "Took me 2 years of rehabilitation to walk naturally again. Another year before I could return to active duty. Yet your people spent resources to make you whole again despite the cost." Park nodded slowly. "On Earth, we've decided that everyone deserves a chance to contribute in their own way. It wasn't always like that. Our history is full of people being cast aside because of physical differences. We're still not perfect, but we're trying." Tay was quiet for a long moment, his exoskeleton shifting colors slightly in the observation deck's light. "Tomorrow are the junior agility trials," he finally clicked. "I watch them every tournament broadcast. I've memorized every course variation for the past 10 years. The longing in his voice needed no translation. "Have you ever thought about competing?" Park asked. "Impossible," Tay replied immediately, but his antennae quivered with suppressed emotion. "The course requires precise balance, jumping between platforms, climbing vertical surfaces, so you'd need better mobility aids," Park interrupted. "Something specialized for the course." Tay's antennae shot up in surprise. "Even if such a thing could be built, no Valaxian would sponsor my entry. It would bring shame to their lineage." Park looked at the young Valaxian, seeing not an alien, but a child with dreams too easily dismissed by those who should have supported him. "What if I sponsored you?" Before Tay could respond, his Uncle Sung appeared, antennae rigid with concern. "Nephew, you've been gone too long. We must return to our quarters." He nodded stiffly to Park. Commander? Uncle. Commander Park was teaching me human card games. Tay clicked excitedly. And he suggested, we are already too visible here. Sung interrupted, his click sharp enough that the translator momentarily struggled to keep up. The Valaxian dignitary delegation has noticed your absence from assigned recreation periods. Park stood. Your nephew and I were just discussing the junior agility trials tomorrow. He seems quite knowledgeable about them. Sung's antennae flattened completely. A pointless interest, come, Tay. After they left, Park remained at the observation window watching the stars. The conversation had stirred something in him. Memories of his own struggles after the injury. The dark moments when he thought his career was over. His purpose lost. His contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Lee. There you are, Commander. The team's been looking for you. Lee glanced at the cards on the table. Playing poker with yourself? Had company earlier, Park replied simply. Lee sighed. Look, Park, there's talk about you spending time with that Valaxian kid. The diplomatic corps is concerned about the optics. Optics? Park raised an eyebrow. The Valaxians stayed neutral during the Proxima conflict when we could have used their help. A lot of humans haven't forgotten that. Plus, frankly, they make people uncomfortable. You're Earth's lead medal contender. Maybe stick with our own. Kind? Park gathered the cards, shuffling them methodically. The kid's name is Tay. He's got a mobility impairment that his society won't help with because they've decided he's not worth the investment. Sound familiar? Lee had the decency to look uncomfortable. That's different. That's their culture, their choice. Is it? Park stood. I'll see you at the semifinals tomorrow. That night, Park couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Tay's makeshift mobility aids, clever but crude, built by a child with limited resources. As a military engineer before his command posting, Park had worked with various prosthetic and assistive technologies. The principles couldn't be that different for Valaxian physiology. Instead of trying to force sleep, he made his way to the station's fabrication lab, reserved for competitors needing equipment adjustments. The night supervisor raised an eyebrow at his arrival but didn't question a semi-finalist's access. Need to make some modifications, Park explained vaguely, setting up at a workstation. Hours passed as he studied Valaxian anatomical references available in the public database, sketching designs on the workstation's projection surface. The challenge energized him. The need to account for an exoskeleton's weight distribution, the six-limbed movement pattern so different from human bipedal motion. Dawn's cycle was beginning when he finally activated the fabrication unit, watching as it printed the components he'd designed. They wouldn't be perfect, but they might be enough to give Tay a chance at the one thing no one thought he could do. As he assembled the pieces, Park realized he felt something he hadn't experienced since before his injury, the pure satisfaction of solving a problem that mattered, of using his skills to open doors rather than just survive. Whether Tay would actually compete remained uncertain, but Park knew that sometimes having options was victory enough. The junior agility trials would begin in 6 hours. The semifinals for marksmanship would start at exactly the same time. Park hadn't missed a practice session in 20 years of competition. Today would be different. The central arena buzzed with excitement as competitors prepared for the day's events. Park stood outside the Valaxian quarters, a duffel bag slung over, his shoulder containing the device he'd spent the night fabricating. He'd tried calling Tay through the station's communication system, but Valaxian quarters were notoriously isolated, a cultural preference for privacy that now proved inconvenient. When the door finally slid open, it wasn't Tay who appeared, but his uncle Sung. The older Valaxian's antennae went rigid with surprise. Commander Park? Why aren't you at your competition? The human semifinals begin shortly. I need to speak with Tay, Park said, glancing at the time display on the corridor wall. Less than 2 hours remained before both events would start. Sung's multiple eyes blinked in rapid succession. My nephew is not well today. The station atmosphere affects Valaxian youth sometimes. It was a polite lie, and they both knew it. Park held his ground. I've brought something for him, he said, patting the duffel bag. Something that might help him compete in the junior trials. Sung's antenna flattened completely against his head, a sign of distress or anger, Park had learned. This is misguided. Kindness, Commander. Sung clicked rapidly. You don't understand our ways. If Tay attempts to compete and fails, the shame will follow him forever. It is better he accepts his limitations. Shouldn't that be his choice? Park asked quietly. Before Sung could answer, movement behind him revealed Tay, who pushed forward, despite his uncle's attempt to block him. Commander Park. The young Valaxian's clicking was so excited that the translator struggled to keep pace. You came. I said I would. Park knelt to be at eye level with Tay. I brought something for you. No pressure to use it, but I thought you might want options. He unzipped the duffel bag and carefully removed the device he'd created, a framework of lightweight alloy designed to integrate with Tay's existing exoskeleton. Unlike his crude original aids, this system featured dynamic joint supports and carefully calibrated balance assists. Tay's antennae quivered visibly. You made this for me. Based on human prosthetic designs adapted for your physiology, Park explained, demonstrating how the components would attach. It's not perfect, but it should give you better stability and movement range. Sung clicked, rapidly his translator converting the sounds into increasingly agitated phrases. This is inappropriate. Our doctors have determined Tay's condition is permanent. False hope is crueler than acceptance. It's not false hope, Park replied, looking directly at Tay rather than his uncle. It's just a tool. What you do with it is up to you. Tay reached hesitantly toward the device, appendages trembling slightly. Could I really compete? I've reviewed the junior course, Park said. With these supports and some determination, I believe you could complete it. Complete is not win, Sung interjected. He would finish last, become a spectacle. Maybe, Park acknowledged. Or maybe he'd be the first of his kind to try something everyone said was impossible. Either way, he'd know what he's capable of instead of what others tell him he can't do. Tay's compound eyes remained fixed on the device. Registration closes in 40 minutes. I would need a guardian sponsor. I'll sponsor you, Park said without hesitation. Sung's antennae shot up in alarm. You cannot. Only family members are certified. Valaxian educators may sponsor juveniles in official competitions. Actually, Park replied, I checked the regulations. Rule 87B allows for cross-species sponsorship in exceptional circumstances, with approval from the tournament committee. I've already filed the request. This wasn't strictly true. Park had researched the rule but hadn't submitted anything yet. Sometimes he'd learned in his military career, acting as if approval was forthcoming was more effective than waiting for permission. The committee would never approve such a thing. Sung clicked. And regardless, I forbid it. As Tay's guardian, I have final authority. Park saw the young Valaxian's antennae droop, his body seeming to collapse in on itself. The familiar sight of hope extinguished made something shift inside the commander. Tay, he said gently, would you give your uncle and me a moment to talk, privately? Once the young Valaxian had moved away, Park turned to Sung. What are you really afraid of? Sung's exoskeleton seemed to dull slightly, losing its sheen. You don't understand the consequences. If Tay participates and performs poorly, he will be marked forever as not just physically flawed but foolish. The Valaxian community is small. Word spreads. His future options, already limited, would become non-existent. And if he doesn't try, Park asked, if he spends his life watching others compete while knowing he never even attempted it himself, what kind of future is that? A realistic one, Sung clicked softly. Reality is often disappointing, Commander. I learned this long ago when I accepted responsibility for a nephew no one else wanted. I am trying to protect him from greater pain. Park considered his next words carefully. When I lost my leg, my commanding officer told me my career was over, that I should accept an honorable discharge and adjust my expectations. If I'd listened to him, I wouldn't be here today. He leaned closer to the Valaxian. Sometimes protection becomes a cage. Sometimes the greatest respect we can show someone is believing they can handle disappointment and keep going. Sung was silent for a long moment, his compound eyes fixed on Park with an unreadable expression. Finally, he clicked softly, "And what of your competition? Your semifinals begin at the same time as the junior trials. You would forfeit your position?" Park had been avoiding this thought all morning. The marksmanship semifinals represented humanity's best chance for a championship in this tournament. As team leader, his absence would not just cost him personally, but would damage Earth's standing. "Some things matter more than medals," he said simply. 30 minutes later, Park stood at the registration desk for the junior agility trials, Tay beside him wearing the newly fabricated mobility system. The clerk, a blue-skinned Xylan with pronounced facial ridges, looked between them in confusion. A human sponsoring a Valaxian juvenile? This is highly irregular. Rule 87B allows for cross-species sponsorship in exceptional circumstances. Park repeated with the confidence of someone who expected to be obeyed. As the clerk processed the unusual request, Captain Lee appeared, face flushed with anger. "Park, what the hell are you doing? The semifinals start in 20 minutes and you're not at the preparation station." "I'm sponsoring Tay in the junior agility trials," Park replied calmly. "They run concurrently with the semifinals." Lee stared at him in disbelief. "You're throwing away your shot at the championship, humanity's shot, for this?" He gestured dismissively toward Tay. The young Valaxian's antennae drooped slightly, but he remained standing tall in his new support system. "I've made my decision," Park said firmly. "The committee won't just let you withdraw without consequences," Lee warned. "The diplomatic corps is already buzzing about your associations. This will end your competitive career." Park met his captain's gaze steadily. "Then it ends." After Lee stormed off, Park knelt beside Tay. "Last chance to back out. Once we're in, we see this through together, whatever happens. Are you ready?" Tay's antennae straightened with determination. "I've been ready my whole life." As they walked toward the junior competitors area, Park felt lighter than he had in years. The weight of expectations, his own and others, seemed to fall away with each step. Whatever happened next today would be about possibility rather than limitation, courage rather than caution. And that, he realized, was a victory already won. The junior agility course sprawled across the arena floor like an impossible landscape, floating. Platforms at varying heights, narrow balance beams, vertical climbing walls, and obstacles that shifted position at random intervals. Young competitors from a dozen species warmed up along the sidelines, their movements fluid and confident. And then there was Tay, the first Valaxian ever to enter these trials, his exoskeleton supported by Park's improvised device. The other, juveniles stared openly, some with curiosity, others with poorly disguised contempt. A group of young Altarians whispered behind slender hands, their translator volumes deliberately lowered but still audible. "Shouldn't be allowed," making a mockery of the competition. "Just for attention." Park placed a hand gently on Tay's shoulder. "Focus on the course, not the crowd." Tay's antennae quivered slightly. "Everyone's watching." "Good," Park replied. "Let them see what's possible." The announcement system chimed, calling competitors to their starting positions. As Tay moved toward his assigned lane, a tournament official approached Park with a concerned expression. "Commander, we've received formal protests from 3 delegations regarding your sponsorship of the Valaxian juvenile. They're questioning the legitimacy of your guardian status." Park remained calm. Rule 87B allows for cross-species sponsorship in exceptional circumstances. "I've submitted all required documentation." "Yes, but there are concerns about appropriateness," the official continued awkwardly. "The Valaxian delegation itself has suggested this arrangement might constitute exploitation of their juvenile for human publicity." Park hadn't expected this particular obstacle. "Have they spoken with Ty? Asked what he wants?" "Valaxian juveniles aren't typically consulted on such matters," the official replied, clearly uncomfortable. "Their social hierarchy is quite rigid." Then, Perhaps it's time for an exception, Park said firmly. Tay has worked hard for this opportunity. He deserves his chance. After a tense discussion with senior officials, a compromise was reached. Tay could compete, but under dual sponsorship with his uncle Sung reluctantly listed as primary guardian. Park would be permitted to remain in the coaching area. As the competitors took their positions, the spectator sections filled rapidly. Word had spread about the unusual entrant, drawing curious onlookers from across the station. Park noticed Earth's delegation entering, their expressions ranging from disappointment to outright anger. Captain Lee pointedly turned away when their eyes met. The first competitors launched into the course, moving with practiced precision through obstacles that would challenge even adult athletes. When Tay's turn came, an expectant hush fell over the arena. The starting signal flashed and Tay moved forward with careful determination. The support system Park had designed worked better than either had dared hope, not offering the fluid grace of unimpaired competitors, but providing enough stability and strength for Tay to navigate the first obstacles. Park watched intently, from the sidelines, mentally tracking each movement, each adjustment Tay made to compensate for his limitations. The young Valaxian was clearly slower than the others, but he was progressing steadily, solving each challenge with methodical focus. Then came the vertical climbing wall, the most demanding obstacle. As Ty began his ascent, one of his support struts caught on an outcropping, momentarily throwing him off balance. The crowd gasped as he dangled precariously, 6 limbs scrambling for purchase. "Stabilize and reset," Park called out, using the coaching phrases they'd practiced during their brief training session that morning. One point of contact at a time. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed Tay might fall. Then, with remarkable presence of mind, he detached the caught strut, reconfigured his remaining supports, and continued climbing, slower but undeterred. The arena had fallen completely silent, hundreds of beings from across the galaxy watching as this improbable competitor refused to surrender to gravity or expectation. Even the Earth delegation leaned forward in their seats, previous animosity forgotten in the drama unfolding before them. Park felt a presence beside him and turned to find Sung watching his nephew with all 4 eyes unblinking. "He's actually doing it." Sung clicked softly, his translator barely audible. "Did you ever doubt he could?" Park asked. "Always," Sung admitted. "That is my failure, not his." As Tay reached the top of the wall, something remarkable happened. A soft clicking sound began somewhere in the Valaxian section of the audience, a single elder tapping his forelegs together in a rhythm Park didn't recognize. Gradually, other Valaxians joined in, the clicking growing louder, more insistent. "What's happening?" Park asked Sung. "The sound of recognition," Sung explained, his own antennae vibrating with emotion. "It is reserved for those who bring honor to the collective. I have not heard it directed at anyone with Tay's condition in my lifetime." The clicking spread beyond the Valaxian section, other species joining with their own forms of appreciation. Soft whistles from the Altarians, deep hums from the Dornax. By the time Tay reached the final obstacle, the entire arena resonated with interspecies applause. He finished last by a significant margin. No fairy tale victory against the odds, but he finished. As Tay crossed the finish line, exhausted but upright, Park couldn't remember feeling prouder of any achievement in his military career. The aftermath unfolded with unexpected speed. Images of the human veteran helping the exhausted Valaxian juvenile from the course became the defining moment of the tournament, broadcast across interstellar networks with the caption, "The True Meaning of Competition." Park's disqualification from the marksmanship semifinals caused a brief diplomatic incident, with Earth's representatives formally protesting before the story caught the public's imagination. Within days, the narrative shifted. Park wasn't a disgrace to humanity, but its finest representative, embodying compassion that transcended species barriers. 2 weeks after the tournament ended, as Park prepared to return to Earth facing an uncertain reception, he received a message from an unexpected source. The Valaxian Medical Collective, notoriously insular and traditionalist, requested his input on a new project developing adaptive technology for physically divergent juveniles. They're calling it the Nexus Initiative, Tay explained during their final meeting at the station's observation deck. The young Valaxian moved with new confidence, his support system now refined by a team of engineers from 3 different species who had volunteered their expertise after witnessing his competition. Engineers from 12 worlds are collaborating. They say my condition presents unique challenges that might lead to innovations beneficial across species. Sounds like you've become valuable to the collective after all, Park observed. Perspective changes everything, Tay clicked, his translator conveying thoughtful reflection. My uncle says I've taught our people to see differently, but you taught me first. 6 months later, Earth hosted the first interspecies adaptive athletics exhibition. As architects of the initiative, Park and Tay led the opening ceremony together, carrying a torch designed to be visible across all known visual spectrums. Representatives from 27 worlds attended, including, remarkably, a full diplomatic delegation from the Valaxian Collective. Preliminary talks began about cultural exchange programs, scientific cooperation, and eventually, a mutual defense pact that would have been unthinkable before the tournament. Park never returned to competitive shooting. Instead, he accepted a position as humanity's first cultural ambassador to the Valaxian homeworld, where he worked with their engineers to develop new generations of adaptive technologies. His military background, once his defining characteristic, became a footnote in his official biography. Sometimes, during quiet moments, Park would think about how differently things might have turned out if he'd ignored the struggling Valaxian juvenile that first day on Nexus Station, if he'd walked past like everyone else focused solely on the competition ahead. It would have been the sensible choice, the expected path. But as he watched Tay address a conference of interspecies educators, the young Valaxian, now a recognized authority on adaptive learning techniques, Park knew he'd won something far more valuable than any medal. He'd found purpose beyond victory, connection beyond comfort, and in doing so, helped change not just one life, but the relationship between entire worlds. Some sacrifices, he had learned, weren't sacrifices at all, but simply choices that revealed what truly mattered.